Super Mario Bros. The movie. The first movie ever made based on a video game property, we widely consider it the worst. The one that ruined video game cinema forever. But what if we didn't? What if we had liked Super Mario Bros. The movie? Never in the history of the Polygon Interdimensional Studies Society has a proposed alteration to the time stream been so contentious. You see, my co-pissers insist this episode of Versus should be about correcting the Super Mario Bros. Movie, that I should timeline hop until I find the universe in which this movie is good and trace back what changes made it so. But I believe the Super Mario Bros. Movie is good, and that we're already in that universe. And with a few minor tweaks to our cultural subconscious that change absolutely nothing about the movie itself, we could be living in an alternate reality where Charlize Theron makes her action debut as Samus, where Luigi is a gay icon, and where nobody gives a fuck about comic book movies. So how do we arrive at this so-called Luigiverse? Well, this movie needs an advocate, one person to engage earnestly and argue for its positive qualities. You might say, Jenna, you bodacious interdimensional science genius, that's not how cultural opinion works. If something's good, it rises to the surface, and if it stinks, it sinks. Except that the scenario I'm describing is exactly what happened to Halloween. One review, written by critic and monk Tom Allen, put the movie in conversation with well-respected horror icons like George Romero, Hitchcock, and Meet Me in St. Louis. I killed him! This piece is considered instrumental in convincing audiences and critics that there was something worthwhile about Halloween. And the rest is history. In our universe, Super Mario Bros. The movie had but one paltry week of sales before another dino-based blockbuster smashed box office records. But in the Luigiverse, long before these movies were made, our reality-warping change occurs. In fall 1987, Gene Siskel of Siskel and Ebert eats some bad chowder. Suffering from food poisoning, he's kept company by episodes of Max Headroom, a cyberpunk TV show directed by duo Annabelle Jankel and Rocky Morton. He forcefully forgets this experience until 1993, when Super Mario Bros. The movie premieres.
Best video game turned into a movie that I've seen. These are minor awards, but they're important, I'm sure, to the filmmaker.
These memories resurface, and Siskel decides that SMB reflects directors Jankel and Morton's work on Max Headroom. He describes SMB as a more earnest take on the genre, hybridized with fantasy elements without relying on the cynical dystopian tropes. He doesn't convince everybody, especially not Ebert, but he does spark a conversation about whether or not cyberpunk, a firmly 80s genre, is indeed dead. So instead of sinking in the wake of Jurassic Park, Super Mario Bros. Proves to be more buoyant. When it finally leaves theaters, it's in the black. Profitable, if not a hit. Some savvy theater operators even package Jurassic Park and Super Mario Bros., selling discounted tickets to a night of dino-based fantasy family fun. In our universe, Super Mario Bros. Almost immediately became a laughingstock, largely because of the Video Game Association and poor box office showings. Its failure burdened every video game movie that came after it. In the Luigiverse, the absence of this perceived curse has huge ramifications on the movie industry. But before we dig into that, I want to see how fame changes Mario and Luigi. In our universe, Luigi is a second stringer, the cowardly shadow to Mario's vapid heroism. But the movie is clearly about Luigi and Daisy, and in the aftermath of its success, Nintendo finally gives them the respect they deserve. Luigi takes center stage in a Super Nintendo game entitled Luigi Center Stage. Riffing on the haunted house concept, the player must help Luigi overcome his stage fright and also his ghost fright. And by the end of the game, Luigi has transformed into the movie version of himself, a himbo. After the success of Luigi Center Stage, the franchise continues to be named Super Mario Bros., Mario being, of course, their last name.
Name! Mario. Last name. Mario.
But now, when the character selection screen pops up, Luigi is your default choice. And Nintendo realizes he needs an arch-rival all his own. Somebody to represent the shadow ego, the instinctive cruelty at the heart of every man, the unhimbo. Yes, with the rise of Luigi, so too do we see the rise of Tuiji. Beautiful but vainglorious, Pessimistic and cruel, Tuiji is the Regina George of the Nintendo universe. He becomes exponentially more popular with the release of Tuiji Tap Inc. Tip Top Competition on the Game Boy Advance in 2002 and the Nintendo DS game Touch Tuiji Touch in 2004. Wario recedes in the Mario mythos, his spot taken over by the more symmetrically appropriate 2 Mario, often referred to by fans as Tumatio for his bulbous green shape. And while Luigi, well, he never exists. There's simply no need for him. Daisy, likewise, becomes the preeminent princess in the Luigiverse, but neither she nor Peach have much agency in either universe, so this doesn't make much difference. In our universe, Super Princess Peach was a puzzle platformer where you grant Peach superpowers by controlling her emotions. It's a little icky, but it was fun, and despite being one of the best-selling DS games, for reasons unknown, it never got a sequel. In the Luigiverse, the developers treat Daisy just the same as Peach, so they make the exact same game. By this point, Daisy has become a beloved icon not only for young women that got into gaming because of the movie, but also for queer gaming communities who interpret Luigi and Daisy as gay-lesbian solidarity. These fans deride the sexist and generic concept as perplexing for this beloved sporty icon, and as such, meme it into the ground.
My wife.
Super Princess Daisy likewise sells well, and likewise, no sequel is ever made. After a few years, an editorial about Nintendo's quote, Daisy problem suggests that we never got a sequel because Nintendo didn't want to alienate its fanbase or risk backlash. Although this is just speculation, it's repeated as though it's fact, and used to justify Nintendo's lack of dame-led games. Back on the cinematic side of our universe, Nintendo didn't really care one way or another how the Super Mario Bros. Movie did. They believed correctly that the Mario brand would hold up regardless of how the film performed, so they sold the license for a relatively cheap $2 million and sent the producers on their merry way. In the Luigiverse, Nintendo continues to be pretty hands-off with media in the 90s, although they do start charging more for licenses. What really changes is Hollywood's belief that there is money in them their properties. The following decade sees the release of Jim Henson's Star Fox series, a Legend of Zelda movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio at his peak teen heartthrobiness, and an Earthbound movie from DreamWorks. The success of the latter encourages Nintendo to officially localize Mother 3 for an English-speaking audience. Also, 1998's Mighty Donkey Kong is a technically profitable movie, unfortunately extending that weird 90s era of ape-centric media. Luigiverse Nintendo looks at sales on games that were licensed out and sees a positive trend. However, we, as Dimension Shamblers, can compare alternate universe sales numbers and see that in fact there's little to no difference. What Nintendo sees as a cross-media boost is actually just the result of a number of inseparable cultural and market forces. In our universe, Nintendo became more hesitant about licensing under Gail Tilden, Vice President of Brand Management. Tilden understood that in the rapidly globalizing world of the internet, licensed media in one market could affect other markets. She still rises to this rank in the Luigiverse, but by then the licensing model is making Nintendo a gross amount of money, so there's no reason to change. Until John Woo's Metroid is released in 2008. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In our universe, it's taken a long time for video game movies to shake off the S&B curse. In the Luigiverse, that noxious reputation never exists. At first, this change is minimal. Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat arrive as they did in our universe, with big box office returns and mixed reviews. But instead of being perceived as exceptions to the curse, producers believe the success represents what audiences want: more video game movies. Both are immediately greenlit for sequels. In our universe, the success of the movie Street Fighter, based on the video game Street Fighter, results in Street Fighter the movie, an arcade machine based on the movie based on the video game. In the Luigiverse, anybody says, hey, wait, let's not do that. So instead, Capcom collaborates with director Steven E. D'Souza for Street Fighter II: The World Warrior, the movie, and Street Fighter EX, the game. EX uses the actors' likenesses for the characters, and the two production teams work together to create special moves that appear in both properties. In our universe, Mortal Kombat director Paul W.S. Anderson was invited to direct the sequel, but opted to go make Hellraiser in space. But he regretted not coming back to shepherd the series further. Our version of MK2 was financially successful but critically panned, considered, like so many other video game movies, to be the worst movie ever made. In the Luigiverse, Anderson sticks with the franchise. MK2 and SF2 are released head-to-head in June 1996. Both are established as fully blown franchises, ironically turning the box office into a battleground for these cinema rivals. We skip the Pirates versus Ninjas period in history because in the Luigiverse, you're either a fighter or a combatant. It is equally inane. Because Anderson directs Mortal Kombat 2, he isn't free to launch Resident Evil in 2002. He never meets his future wife Mila Jovovich, and he never becomes Hollywood's most prolific wife guy. Instead, Capcom goes for their first choice for the Resident Evil movie, George A. Romero. And the title of Hollywood's most prolific wife guy goes to Lynn Weissman. In our universe, Romero did write a script for the first Resident Evil movie, one that stuck closely to the game's plot, itself basically a ripoff of Romero's own work. But Capcom passed on the script, saying it, quote, wasn't good, so Romero was fired. In the Luigiverse, it's a safer bet to stick to your sources, so Capcom keeps on Romero to direct his script after a few rewrites. Plus, Capcom decides to push the collaborative strategy they've been using for the Street Fighter movies and games even further. The Luigiverse version of Resident Evil, the movie, follows Chris Redfield, while the 2002 GameCube remake only lets you play as Jill Valentine. The stories are divergent but intersect at key moments. To keep the experience consistent, the remake has extensive FMV cutscenes directed by Romero. A low-budget affair, the movie has no problem recouping its costs. The game does unexpectedly well, luring in horror movie fans who have no idea Resident Evil is about to become an action franchise. In 1998, director Rob Cohen reads an article in Vibe about illegal NYC street racing, and it just makes sense to meld it with hit PlayStation game Gran Turismo. Starring Vin Diesel and Paul Walker, the Gran Turismo movie is praised for its first-person driving sequences, a stylistic choice that remains consistent in the many sequels that follow. As part of this ongoing franchise, Sony produces a series of hugely popular arcade versions of the movie, which revitalized the mostly dead arcade industry. Gran Turismo the movie, the arcade game, helps popularize the concept of the bar-backed arcade by giving adults a place to safely drink and drive. All of this causes another curse from our universe to begin disintegrating. Much like video game movies, video games have a dire reputation as uninspired cash-ins. This is mostly because of Atari's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, itself the Super Mario Bros. The movie of video games. It has been cited as one of the main causes of the video game crash of 1983. But in both universes, it's still standard practice to make game tie-ins for any big blockbuster, so both Jurassic Park and The Lost World have plenty. Among the best received was an action game called The Lost World: Jurassic Park by DreamWorks Interactive. In the Luigiverse, Universal Studios is keenly aware of the increasing overlap of the game-movie industry, so they purchased DreamWorks Interactive in 1999. The production cycle for Jurassic Park 3, the movie and game, are synced up to allow for a deeply collaborative experience. This includes script and cutscene direction by Steven Spielberg and FMV performances by the main cast. This strategy becomes known as dual production or DuPro. Because Jurassic Park 3 is the most successful DuPro to date, it's hailed as the innovator. Of course, we dimension-straddling wizards have seen the slow buildup of this kind of production for years, and know many studios contributed. In our universe, the Wachowski sisters did something very near to this for The Matrix. They filmed cutscenes for Enter the Matrix on set with the actors from the movies. They still do this in the Luigiverse, but by then, it's just standard procedure. In the Luigiverse, DreamWorks Interactive releases Jurassic Park 3 Engine Force alongside the movie. It follows roughly the same story arc, but extends the ending by including an additional action-packed chapter. There is hearty debate among the fans about whether this is canon. Regardless, they buy the game in droves. But this does nothing at all to correct the screenplay issues that delayed Jurassic Park 4's production by 15 years in our universe. In fact, it takes even longer in the Luigiverse. But DreamWorks Interactive continues to produce Jurassic Park games, loyally waiting for the day when the films return from war. JP3 Squads sees the franchise morph into a Counter-Strike-alike, where InGen security faces off against Biosyn invaders, and also there are dinosaurs. It sells in the millions. By the time HBO prestige drama and video game experience The Last of Us premieres in 2013, the majority of AAA games are produced in the do-pro strategy. Some of the biggest directors have lent their talents to the FMVs of some of the biggest games, and they have the power to stop what they see as unlicensed streaming of their movies on a relatively new platform known as Twitch.movie. Streamers argue that fair use applies to video games because the act of playing is interpretive and transformative as it is in our universe. But in 2012, the courts decide that a significant portion of most games is in fact movie-based cutscenes, and therefore streaming is copyright infringement. The streaming industry dries up almost overnight, and many YouTube gaming channels we know and love are never created at all. Back in our universe, action genius John Woo was set to direct a Metroid movie, but it collapsed because Nintendo wouldn't let Woo make decisions about Samus's backstory. In the Luigiverse, Nintendo still doesn't care what licensed movies do with their characters, so Woo goes wild. The movie cuts out the alien-themed horror and goes full-throated bullet opera. Charlize Theron, star of Mighty Donkey Kong, captures Samus's warm but stoic independence while turning out some truly captivating stunts. Metroid smashes the box office record set by Catherine Bigelow's Fallout. But in the Luigiverse, Nintendo, as always 10 years behind any trend, still isn't doing do-pro. So when Metroid Other M is released 2 years later, it's entirely unrelated to John Woo's masterpiece. Critical and fan reaction is largely positive, except for the writing, acting, characterization, and cutscenes, which fall flat compared to Woo's pert direction. Not to mention that other games pull in some of the biggest directors of the era, while Metroid Other M still sounds like this.
Codename Baby's Cry. A common SOS with the urgency of a baby crying. The nickname comes from the fact that the purpose of the signal is to draw attention.
In both universes, Reggie Fils-Aimé stated that Nintendo's bar for success on Metroid was around 1.5 to 2 million. In the Luigiverse, it falls shy of that. Executives at Nintendo believe it's because of the Metroid movie, and fans believe it's because of the Daisy Curse. Except that you and I know that Metroid Other M received similar criticisms in our universe, even without the comparisons to Woo's work. The game is by no means a failure in either reality, but it develops a reputation in both as a franchise killer. In the aftermath of Other M, Nintendo cancels all pending licensing deals and goes dark on cross-media production for 3 years. Until 2011, when Nintendo announces Mario Brothers, a grounded, heartwarming story of two estranged brothers forced together on a cross-country road trip to their childhood friend Toad's funeral. But of greater interest to the media industry is the launching of Nintendo Studios, an entirely in-house production company. After the success of Mario Brothers, Nintendo Studios plans an ambitious slate of origin flicks for their main franchises. The once disparate Nintendo media landscape is rebooted with one unified canon. And who should appear in the after-credits scene for Kirby's Dream Land but Masahiro Sakurai himself, saying, "What if I told you we were putting a team together?" Super Smash Bros. Is heralded as the most ambitious crossover event in history. Fans clamor to play the do-pro Super Smash Bros. 4, causing sales of the Wii U to nearly double. Nintendo Studios starts planning the next phase of its movies, only to realize its backlog of recognizable characters is pretty shallow. It's time to expand their holdings. Despite a few strong showings, an independent Marvel Studios never quite gets their act together making movies about comic books. Everybody knows American audiences only want movies about video games. So in 2015, Nintendo purchases the struggling studio for a song. And then they cut a much bigger check for Capcom Films, the studio behind hits like Bionic Commando and Law & Order Ace Attorney. They began spinning off more and more sub-franchises. In the Luigiverse, theaters in 2021 are starting to see signs of recovery. Horror fans are terrified by Chris Rock's Hole, the newest entry in the Silent Hill series. The long-awaited Daisy-cursed Bayonetta faces off against GT9, And fans of more atmospheric indie Dupros can always watch Dev Patel in The Shovel Knight. If you're lucky, your local arcade theater will have the fully blown Dupro experience, where you can play the action sequences on an individual screen, assuming your theater doesn't need a day one patch. And if you bring your own handheld console, you can save your progress for when you inevitably buy and play the game at home. This year sees the long-awaited new entry of a beloved franchise. Jurassic Universe fails to tap into what has made Jurassic Park Squads one of the best-selling game series of all time. Some believe that the lack of first-person shooter sequences made it boring and not gamified enough. Others think it adheres too closely to the game's story, rather than branching off into new territory. Everybody agrees it's a bad movie. At the box office, it's demolished by Nintendo Presents Marvel vs. Capcom. 2016's hit console, the Wii US, sees a huge boost in sales as audiences rush to play the movie and watch the game. Are movies just extended trailers for much longer and more expensive games? Are games just 20-hour-long advertisements for movies? Are either art? At the end of the day, in the Luigiverse, different giant media conglomerates made a ton of money. Others just made different money. And nobody at all thinks much about Super Mario Bros. The movie.